Okay, everyone, there's a slight issue with attendees joining, so we're just going to hold off for another minute or so. We'll be with you shortly. Welcome to everyone just joining. We just got another minute or so before the session goes ahead. Welcome to everyone just joining us. We'll be starting the session in around 1 minute. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to everyone just joining. We'll be going live shortly. Thanks for your patience. Hello to everyone just joining. We'll be going live shortly. Thank you.
ខ្ញុំដែលបានដើរទុកហ្នឹងមិនត្រឹមតែ
Welcome to the 2021 UNC Water and Health Conference. I am Sonny Elisha from the RTI USID eWatch program in Nigeria. Today, I want to recognize Aliud Aladi Umar, the Commercial Director at the Niger State Water and Sewage Corporation, Niger State, Nigeria. With the COVID-19 restrictions, the corporation had to develop a strategy of sustaining water supply and other downstream activities. Considering that pre-pandemic, the utilities billing and collection systems were essentially manual, Aliu immediately launched alternative revenue collection initiatives, which included the use of ATMs, POS, and mobile banking platforms. This creativity led to a dramatic improvement in both billing and collection efficiencies. He deserves my conference shout out.
Hi, my name is Emily Cruz, and I'm the Senior Global Lead for Menstrual Health at Splash. Today, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my colleague, Mayuri Bhattacharjee, the Senior Program Coordinator for Menstrual Health in our Kolkata office, for her tireless work on launching the India version of the OKI Unicef app. Mayuri has been working with girls through WhatsApp and other remote channels to test the app. She's been working with translators to translate the content into Bengali and Hindi, and she's been developing a strategy to promote the app through remote channels once we're ready to launch. Mayuri's tenacity, perseverance, and commitment to girls in Kolkata is ensuring that they still have access to critical menstrual health information and support during the season of COVID and while schools are closed. So thank you, Mayuri, for your work, and we really appreciate you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Alexander from World Vision India, based in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Here is my big shout out to my colleague Patrick Chetri. He has been a catalyst between the government and service providers in bringing the services to the community that we work, and he has been on wheels whenever there is a need in the community to get it done. We have installed the hands-free sanitizers and hands-free hand washing units in the community strategic points, and we have ensured that the PHCs, primary healthcare centers in the rural India, to get PPE kits, oxygen concentrators, and hand washing units in the community. And his work during the pandemic is commendable, and he has been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic times, and his work is much regarded. Ensure that all the facilities are disabled friendly, inclusive, and gender friendly, so that everyone can access to it. I commend Patrick for all the work and his commitment during these days. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the final plenary of the 2021 Water and Health Conference. I'm Aaron Salzberg, the director of the Water Institute here at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And we'd like to start with a couple of announcements. First, just to remind everyone, we're only gonna do a couple now, but we'll do a lot more announcements at the end of this session. So do please stick with us as we wrap up today's plenary and the conference at the end of this particular session. I want to give a quick thank you to all those who are reporting out on our conference and on social media. For those of you who haven't seen the Twitter space and LinkedIn and all the other spaces, we really appreciate all the attention that you're bringing to the conference and your efforts to actually get this material out to the rest of the world. So thank you so much for all the contributions you're all making to the conference and to helping communicate the messages that are being broadcast from here in Chapel Hill. Let's see, next slide. Oh, thank you again to all of our interpreters. We very much appreciate, we know this is not easy for them. For those of you who are looking for interpretation services, there are 5 languages that are available. You can see them at the bottom of your screen. Please do make use of them. And thank you again to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who sponsored all of our interpretation. And finally, again, thank you to our big sponsors for the UNC conference, German Cooperation, GIZ, Washington Schools Network. We very much appreciate the support that you've given, particularly for this particular session. And again, at the end of our session today, we'll talk about, run through the list of all the other sponsors and thank yous. So we'll hold that off. Okay, so let's get started then with today's plenary. So this session is going to work a little bit differently than the other plenaries that we had this week. And most of the other cases, we jumped right into a plenary discussion. Today, however, we're extremely fortunate to have 2 very special guests. So what we're going to do is to bracket our panel discussion with short remarks from our 2 guests, which I think will help inform the conversations that we're going to have. So let's get started. Our closing plenary, for those of you who are well familiar with the conference, is where we reflect on new developments that were reported on during the week and discuss the opportunities for translating this science into action. In other words, using the science and evidence we've collected to drive change at scale in both practice and policy. And that's our goal for today, to leave the week energized about how we take what we've learned to generate real change. And when you think about what leads to change, there are really 3 successful ingredients. We need the right solutions, we need the right opportunity, and we need the right leadership that can take advantage of these opportunities to advance and institutionalize these solutions at scale. Over the next 2 years, many of you know, we've been talking about it throughout the week, we in the water sector will have a unique opportunity to reshape how the world works on water. As one of our upcoming panelists, Ann Thomas, noted, in 2023 will be the first time in 50 years that governments will be meeting at the UN for a high-level meeting on water. So the opportunity is there. The question now is, do we have the solutions and the leadership to capitalize on that opportunity? And so we're very fortunate to start off the conversation. We've invited Ambassador Chava Kuroshi. If you don't know him, you should. Over the past decade or so that I've known him, Ambassador Kuroshi has worked behind the scenes across the highest levels of governments to catalyze greater global action on water. I won't read his entire biography, but since 2015, Ambassador Kuroshi has served in the office of the President of Hungary as head of the Directorate for Environmental Sustainability. In this role, he served as the chief advisor to the President for the high-level panel on water convened by the UN Secretary General and the President of the World Bank Group. He's also held a number of other government postings, including serving as the permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations in New York and the vice president of the 66th General Assembly of the United Nations. He's also been the co-chair of the UN Open Working Group to produce the Sustainable Development Goals, among many, many other things. In other words, there are few people that I know better, that know better what it takes to motivate governments and heads of state to action. Ambassador Kuroshi, oh great, you're on the screen. I've had the opportunity to work with you and see your own personal dedication and passion for these issues. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that you've done to advance water issues globally. That said, we still appear to be lagging and not making all the progress that we'd like to. What can we do to change that?
Thank you much indeed for the generous introduction, Aaron. And the most natural question you have put after so many years, so many efforts, so many agreements and goals, why are we lagging on the water management issues? And the situation, as you may know, is very different from country to country. as a result of a combination of various factors. Let me just very, very quickly and shortly recall 7 often recurring problems. One is the most striking one is the inadequate access to piped clean water. It is rightly regarded as our top priority issue. However, it is not just one of the missing targets, but more or less it is the consequence of the other problems. Second, could be mentioned is when sanitation and wastewater management is lagging way behind, and this gap is reproduced on a daily basis if the water supplies and the water management are dealt with separately, particularly in urban areas. Three could be a frequent challenge that the withdrawal of fresh water significantly exceeds the natural capability of replenishment, which leads to approaching day zero, as we saw it a couple of times in the last few years. A factor or a problem number 4 could be the lack of integrated water resource management that may lead to a disproportionate use of water by certain actors to the detriment of others. This challenge is obviously existing both within and among countries. Could be a 5th factor, lack of adequate financial resources for water-related investment, along with poor planning and poor maintenance. Any of them can bring down the water supplies. When you are running a utility infrastructure with 50% of network loss or more, it is very difficult to calculate the operation in economic or financial terms. Another one is climate and demographic change. They are already heavily impacting the availability of water supplies and the resilience of our water infrastructure and resilience to disasters. And finally, in some places, it's a major challenge to secure the necessary expertise to plan, build, and run water-related projects. So the challenges and possibilities in different corners of the world show diverse picture. Solutions might be different, as priorities also vary from place to place. It is useful to consolidate a toolbox, but the exact policies and projects can only build upon the local and regional realities with local and national ownership and leadership. But you rightly put the question, whom the leaders listen to, how we can help, how we can assist the leaders, what can be interesting for them. Let me put forward 6 suggestions, mostly based on the work of the high-level panel on water and the recently convened Water and Climate Leaders panel. Some of them might be provocative, I acknowledge. One, reliable, processed, and integrated data and methodology to measure sustainable development. We often have a large volume of data from various fields, but not adequately integrated. What the decision makers need is a reliable indication of the broadest societal, economic, and environmental consequences of their decisions or lack of decisions. This integration methodology is still missing, not only in water sector, but in managing sustainable development in general. We measure standalone parameters mostly, but have difficulty to tell whether our decisions and projects are leading to the creation of additional values, or we just transform one type of capital to another, while the overall balance is or might be stagnating or shrinking. Some countries and knowledge centers have been working on this methodology for many years, but it's time to come up with a workable and adaptable solution. The second suggestion or advice piece for the leaders define new financial rationale to take into account societal benefits. It is a translation of the integrated data processing and methodology into the language of finances. If we better understand the impact, we can also better calculate the broader benefits for stability and development of our societies. It will give a better sense of the overall return on investment. The third point, third suggestion, third help, if you wish, for the leaders could be show the true value of water in local and regional context. Water has multiple values for human consumption, health, food production, industry, energy production, etc. But the actual value depends on the factors that vary from region to region. The good solution is always the one that creates the best and lasting impact, creates the most added value, and reduces the biggest losses or risks. A fourth suggestion could be integrate water and climate agenda for decision making. We know how strongly water and climate challenges overlap for about 80% or even higher. Still, most of our actions are designed in a separate manner, though it would be more efficient to spend resources by acknowledging that causes and consequences are strongly interlinked. Decision makers and all water users may hugely benefit from the open access to an integrated climate and water stocktake platform. The fifth could be a further spreading of river basin cooperation framework for water climate adaptation and mitigation activities. It is, and it has always been, hot potato. But the problem is still there, and it is growing by the day. And the climate change will only exacerbate it. The potential benefit for parties are much broader than the agreement on dividing the available amount of water. And lastly, launch a global water observing system. It's also a hotly debated issue. True, much of the water resources management has local, regional, and basin rationale. But it would be a mistake to seek uniform solutions to very different type of challenges in different parts of the world. However, it would be useful for decision makers to know what is happening to the Earth's water resources, how it impacts their region, and what might be expecting them further down on the road. We have already part of this system working, and we are using it for meteorology. But we don't have the observing system yet to support a better water-related cooperation in the midst of climate change. So there will be good opportunities in the forthcoming 1.5 to 2 years, including the conference you have mentioned, that is bound to produce breakthroughs. So I hope that you scientists and practitioners can advise leaders to take it seriously. The time is now, when if not now?
No, thank you, Ambassador. No, great points, especially given your experience. And actually, I hope it's not necessarily well known among our community, but next week, the WMO is holding its hydrologic assembly, where we also do hope to look at some of those broader observational tools that will allow us to better understand what the state and future of our hydrologic resources are. And so that's an important part of this. You know, you talked a lot about the economic incentives. You've engaged with heads of state now for many, many years, trying to encourage them to work on these kinds of issues, both privately and in the water conference that Hungary hosts and in other places. What's the argument that works best when you're talking to a head of state or a minister about why they should care about water? What has resonated for them? Is it always about just the economic message and the economic costs? What resonates?
I found the most powerful argument for them that it is a centerpiece for the transformation, centerpiece for the sustainable development. If you put your water-related issues into order, you have a good chance to achieving the transformation. If that lags behind, most probably the whole structure is crumble.
And I certainly agree with you. I think water underpins broad-based economic development and growth and security, food, energy, health in these countries. Is that a compelling message, though? I mean, we sit in the UN, we talk about this a lot. Does it really get them to move to action, or do we have to demonstrate that through case studies? I mean, you mentioned the need for integrated data sets that really help convince or portray what the impacts of these issues are on health, economic growth, environmental conditions within these places. Is that data really the critical part that's missing to get these governments to move towards action?
A couple of years ago, the notion of implementing the sustainable development transformation was a little bit esoteric. It was not really appealing for the politicians. But it seems to me that more and more they are coming on board. The more and more they are understanding that without taking seriously those goals that have been decided upon, without taking seriously the notion that we need to create more values with reduced footprints, without that, it would be very, very difficult to gain elections, to win elections. It would be very difficult to mobilize more capital, and it would be very difficult to have an influence, an impact. Last but not least, on this point, in the heads of politicians, water used to be a source of problems, source of challenges, source of danger that they have to keep in bay. When they come to understand that water might be a driver of the economy, and it is, in fact, if we manage properly, then they understand that they can unleash an additional engine for their economies.
So that positive message about what water can give you, if done right, is much more compelling than the negative messages of here's what's going wrong, here's the problems, and here are the negative impacts and consequences. Pointing to the positive impacts is going to be more important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we need to change the conversation in this term, political conversation. Instead of talking about the negative scenarios, we should much more talk about the real opportunities and real solutions that produces additional values.
And what's your sense, there seems to be a general struggle these days with science, not just around climate change, but around almost everything. We have a strong science community here focused on research. How valuable is science in these discussions that happen among leaders and heads of state? Where can science really make a difference?
We always had a slight challenge how to connect science with political decision making. We're talking for years and years about the bridging and the interfacing. What made the real change of sea, I think it was IPCC. When the politicians understood that thousands of experts, thousands of scientists who came together from different corners of the world and taking into account only adequate science-based facts, they made projections, and their projections proved to be true. And those projections are influencing the life of societies, the functioning of the economy, and our outlook, actually, our prosperity, our outlook. They started treating science in a different manner. So how most governments take into consideration scientific advice, both in terms of substance and in terms of procedures, today, I think it's very, very different from the one it was 5 years ago. Let me open a small, intimate secret for the time being. The slogan of the next vision statement, of the next candidate for the president of the General Assembly will be science, solutions, solidarity. So hopefully it might be a centerpiece in the work of the General Assembly.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. I've heard a rumor that you are a candidate for the next president of the UN General Assembly. Look, 2023 is going to be an incredible year for water, and having you or someone with your passion for our sets of issues, I think, is a great opportunity for the water community. What could we do to help strengthen your ability to elevate water issues within the General Assembly during that period?
And I see a number of challenges so far, which will influence the work of the General Assembly the next year and the years after. Let's start from that. No doubt, water resources are likely to be one of the most critical natural resources in the first half of the 21st century. But we still don't treat this natural source according to its meaning. The second, what will stay with us, we still often regard water, as I mentioned you, as a source of difficult problems, not so much as a driving engine of the economies. Three, we are still far from dealing with our water challenges through an integrated approach. Four, that will stay with us, our institutional structure may not be the most efficient one, adequate one, to support national and international cooperation. Another factor that we all need to account with, that there are big question marks how the inputs by the civil society and the science community could find its way to enrich deliberations of the General Assembly. It's rather ad hoc, it's rather amorph, it's rather soft. So we may find a better solution on that. Your advice will be very much needed and appreciated. We are also hesitant how to handle the new chapter of development when the traditional, mostly geopolitical risk factors and the challenges rooted in our unsustainable way of development are jointly shaping the stability and instability of our communities and nations. And last but not least, we are in a new phase of development in terms of the traditional rules-based development, what we went through for many years. We have added to that the notion of the goals-based development, but the two, in some cases, might be contradicting, on the short terms at least. So we need to find the good way out of these contradictions. So if we take into those major issues and major challenges, let me ask you and your colleagues and the whole community now watching this conference, three points how to assess the UN. First, help the first comprehensive UN conference on water since 1977 be an impact-oriented to deliver breakthroughs. If not now, then when? The second, the Agenda 2030 will be halfway through next year. The water community may ask itself how to improve mainstreaming the water-related issues to boost the implementation of the agenda in general. And third and last, you may wish to help decision makers to understand how to benefit from other spheres of development, including data processing, circular economy, to serve progress and social and environmental stability. We are talking about stability. And Aaron, we have no shortage of goals. We have no shortage of agreements, but we have a poor record of the time implementing them. Therefore, I think it is a time to embrace all the goals, embrace all the agreements, and work on the impact. Therefore, I suggest it might be a kind of slogan for the General Assembly to work through and along science, solutions, and solidarity. Please help in that.
Thank you, Ambassador. I appreciate that. And I think the call from our community to provide the evidence, not just on the challenges, but on the impacts and opportunities for countries to make progress in addressing health, environmental, and security concerns is loud and clear. I think the call to develop solutions that are technical, policy, and institutionally oriented is also loud and clear. And those are things that I hope that we can respond to and support you in. Before we turn to our panel, did you have any other closing remarks that you wanted to make for us?
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
Sorry, before we turn to our panel, are there any other closing remarks that you'd like to make for us?
Well, I wish you all the best with this conference, and I hope see you and your colleagues on the water conference in the UN next year. It will be the historic opportunity.
What I will say, and I'm not asked to speak for the community, but I'm sure that we would all be more than willing to support you in whatever way we can to advance the drinking water sanitation agenda within this UN framework. So I think if you call on us, we'll be there.
Many thanks.
No, thank you for your time today. Very much appreciated. To reflect on some of this, I'd like to invite up 4 panelists. We'll talk a little bit about the role of leadership and the opportunities coming up within the UN system. Henry Northover, I won't read, by the way, I'm not going to read all their bios. You can see them all on the website in detail, but Henry Northover, he's a senior consultant and former global head of policy at WaterAid UK. Ann Thomas, senior advisor for WASH at UNICEF. Perry Rivera, the former chief operating officer for the Manila Water Company. And many of you know Kitchen Mibawa, the project manager for the African Ministers Council on Water. So thank you all. If you can turn on your cameras and you can join us for a few minutes. Kitch hopefully is joining us. I know he's in an airport getting ready to get on a plane, but maybe Anne, we can start with you since we were talking quite a bit about the UN events coming up in 2023. You know, what are UNICEF's plans for 2023 and how can we bring more attention to these issues that we've discussed this week?
Thanks, Aaron. And you know, it's been such a great conference. And one of the things that I found very impressive throughout the week was the fact that the sessions were able to bring together policymakers with researchers and practitioners. And just, you know, speaking to some of the points raised by Ambassador Kuroshi, I think it's so important for us as a sector to really appreciate those challenges coming from the front line of the sector and to pay attention to the evolving needs for evidence and support as we enter this last leg of the SDG period. So just in terms of UNICEF's plans for 2023 and the first UN Water Conference in nearly 50 years, I wanted to make a few points. First, you know, recognizing the scale of the challenge, UNICEF is making a shift in approach toward progressively helping governments to achieve safely managed sanitation. And with this shift, a greater focus on system strengthening and the innovation needed around that. This is going to be embodied in what we're calling our Game Plan 2.0. And it's essentially an operational strategy that we've designed to effectively leverage our support to governments in country. A second point is that we're structuring this operational strategy around the SDG Global Acceleration Framework that we discussed a lot this week, but essentially entails data, capacity, financing, governance, and innovation. And just to give you a few examples of what this is really going to look like at country level, on the data front, we'll be working closely with governments to support data to inform better policy making and decision making. In many cases, we've seen that the process itself of supporting governments to look at data, to develop better definitions and better baselines of safely managed sanitation can be the basis for improved sector dialogue, realistic planning, and target setting for the sector. So this is, for us, a kind of low-hanging fruit of engagement and one of the pillars of engagement under the SDG accelerators. On the governance and leadership issue, which has been a central theme throughout the week, we look at leveraging existing structures and initiatives going on in the sector now, like the SDG +5 report that was recently launched in Africa that helps to ground the SDG accelerators within country action frameworks. We also feel that standing behind and supporting the Africa Sanitation Policy Guidance Initiative led by AMCOW is a great opportunity not only to scale and strengthen policy across Africa, but potentially to cross-fertilize those learnings to other regions around the world. I think just finally, as just in response specifically to the UN Water Conference in 23, the SDG Accelerator Framework was itself developed as a tool to help capture the full potential of the UN across agencies and agendas. So 2023 is really that opportunity to look at how we come together with a coherent vision and a common joint work plan. We have a number of great examples globally now of the UN working together on common agendas. A great example, and just in light of the fact that we have Global Hand Washing Day next week, is the Hand Hygiene for All initiative that was used to help drive greater government leadership in the hygiene sector. And I think the challenge before 2023 will be to use this framework to help develop a more coherent vision of action across the sector. And finally, maybe just that we recognize that partnership is going to be key. And this is not limited just to the UN, but how we partner more broadly to affect the kind of scale and innovation needed to really meet the challenge of the SDG for sanitation. Back to you.
And thanks for that. But I'm going to push you on one quick comeback here. This idea of, what we're looking for is national level visions, right? National level governments to be able to start coming forward with the plans and strategies that they've got and that they're going to try to operationalize, obviously informed by hopefully all the products and the great work that we've done through the Accelerator Framework and everything else. It really is hopefully about empowering national governments to be able to come forward within the UN system and describe how they're making progress. Is that the way that we convince others to join in?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is all about country action, Aaron. And I think what we try to do with this sort of grand framework that we've developed is to try and bring it home into, what does this translate to at country level, and what are the kind of actions specifically that fall under that not only the UN, but different actors can engage with countries on. And I mentioned the point about data only because it is probably the most granular of activities that we do that really puts the government in the driving position, because it empowers governments with data that can inform, how they set targets. It's and even just the basic act of defining safely managed sanitation in a local context. It's not about following a JMP definition necessarily. It's really taking a basic standard or guideline and then applying it locally. And I think that is a catalytic process from what we've seen, that review process and that data collection, building data systems that can inform policy helps to develop really grounded programs and realistic plans for countries.
Thanks, Anne. Kitch, I'm going to call on you next. I know you have to catch a plane, so I want to make sure you get the chance to talk to some of these issues. How can Ambassador Kuroshi talked a little bit about the what's going to happen up in the UN. Regional processes, I think, can be very, very important in preparing for 2023. In fact, I think the UN has agreed that we will have regional meetings to help inform what happens in 2023. AMCOW can play a critical role, I think, in catalyzing action within the African continent. I mean, from your standpoint, though, what do you see are the challenges to prioritizing water with national governments, particularly in the African region?
Thank you very much, Aaron, and good day to all participants this year's conference. As Aaron said, I'm Kitch Bauer, and I speak here with warm greetings from the heart of Africa, Abuja, Nigeria. And looking at to directly respond to the question raised by Aaron, I think for me, two things stand out. In our advocacy effort as the African Ministers Council, Committee of the African Union on Water and Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, as key challenges to is finance.
Kitch, you
And-
may want to close your video down just because that might improve your audio.
Okay, perfect. So first for me is financing, and by this I'm not referring to the absence of financing. Let me just wait for this announcement to pass, then I'll continue. Okay, so I think it's lack of the inability of governments to innovatively mobilize financing within and without. So that is a critical challenge that needs to be addressed. We have pension funds and we have other sources of funding that can be innovatively mobilized. And I think as one of the commitments of the, if you can hear me, I can continue. But one of the commitments of the Africa-SAN ministerial dialogue in 2015 is the ability to be able to mobilize effectively engage the private sector. So I think if we are able to effectively involve the private sector, we can leverage a lot of financing that can help to drastically accelerate progress to national, regional, and global goals and targets. Then the second is capacity. And capacity is human resource capacity, and that was also that has been addressed several times, and we're monitoring, and there are slight improvements. But then even the capacity to be able to organize institutional arrangements that will respond to the challenges that countries face in the ability to provide access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. So I think for us, if we are able to address these two critical bottlenecks, that then we can be able to make meaningful progress. And unfortunately, there are ministerial commitments that have been made in that regard by African ministers in charge of water and sanitation. And to link this up with the UN Water Conference, we are working on with the African Union Commission to organize the only second water and sanitation heads of state summit since 2008. Aaron, you're very familiar with Sharm el-Sheikh, and we're working on organizing the second heads of state summit on water and sanitation on the margins of the World Water Forum in Dakar, Senegal. And AMCAO intends to also, prior to that, have a roundtable of first ladies to look at how first ladies of the continent, to look at how we can effectively engage them, particularly on the issue of sanitation and hygiene. And I think these are very influential people that occupy very influential positions on the continent that we have not, tapped into their capabilities and the potential that they hold. Over to you, Aaron.
Since we only have you for a short time, let me follow up with one quick question. And I appreciate your highlighting some of the opportunities that are coming up for where we're going to be seeing leadership on the African continent coming together around these issues. What you've seen our conference, you've sat through some of the conversations. What can we do from our side that would help support your efforts to mobilize African leaders to address these kinds of issues?
Yes, I think one other problem that I didn't mention is the issue of data gaps, and my friend Anne mentioned that in her intervention. And so I will relate this to the broader monitoring and reporting globally, regionally, and nationally. We have a lot of data gaps that we need to deal with. But then there is also the issue of coherence and synergy that needs to be built among the different stakeholders that are leading on the monitoring initiatives at the global level. For instance, like the Unicef and WHO, JMP, and the glass monitoring system. How can we effectively how can we ensure that there's synergy between the AMCOW water sector and sanitation monitoring system, which is based on the mandate of the heads of state of the African Union from Sharm el Sheikh? How can we effectively integrate that so that one, we reduce the burden on member states. Second, we ensure data integrity, and three, we build complementarity among the different initiatives. I think that's one key area that we can leverage on. And then, uh, secondly, it's still back to the issue of capacity and financing. If we, is the global water and sanitation community, what one.
Oh, did we just lose you, Kitch? Okay, maybe we, sorry, I'm gonna give him 1 second.
I think we
Okay,
might
maybe
have.
we, well, no, that's okay. We'll see if he comes back on, we can put him back in, but it was clear, you know, the calls to action around identifying obviously new ways of mobilizing resources, the ideas of how do we improve data monitoring and achieve better coherency between the regional initiatives for monitoring and collecting data around these challenges and some of the global processes that are going on. And then of course, this capacity, you know, addressing the capacity gap and how we build. So these are really great ways for us to be able to think about in terms of contributing. Perry, Kitch mentioned the private sector and the need to get the private sector involved. And, you know, one of the things that I noted at the beginning of this discussion is that leadership really matters, I think, on WASH. And we're going to hear a little bit more of that from someone who I think is a great leader in our sector, Madam Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyer. But Perry, we need leadership in the private sector. This is something that you've struggled with for a long time. Can you give me a sense of, you know, what is it that the private sector can do, and what can governments do to help support the private sector's engagement in addressing some of these challenges?
Good evening, Aaron. Good evening to all participants, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experience in the WASH sector. A brief history first. Manila Water was the result of a government policy adopted by then President Ramos in 1995 to introduce private sector to address a looming crisis in Metro Manila. And then President Fidel Ramos played a key role, I think, being a dynamic leader, a consensus builder, and he was able to address key infrastructure bottlenecks in the early 1990s. That's power outage. Number two would be very inefficient telco services and a looming economic crisis. I will always remember Fidel Ramos to be a very dynamic leader because he and his team were able to address these issues. Okay. Earlier, there was a term used, a strong government. To be honest, Aaron, strong government is a very sensitive topic in the Philippine context, given our experience with our past political leaders. I'd rather use dynamic, inclusive, consensus building leadership, okay? And I'm very proud of the fact that a few hours ago, our fellow citizen, Maria Ressa, just garnered the Nobel Peace Prize a few hours ago. She was able to secure that in the context of the challenges here in the Philippines. So government, I think, plays a very crucial role because action or inaction of government will provide incentives or lack of it to the private sector. In the case of Manila Water, we just responded to a clear policy framework that the Fidel Ramos put or established in 1995. The rest is history. There was a massive investment in wash services in Metro Manila. Obviously, we still face a lot of challenges, including climate change. But the reason why we are now serving the two concessionaires, nearly 20 million people, was essentially because of the policy initiated by government. There are a lot of challenges, but what is important is that the government puts a clear policy framework and provide the incentives for the private sector. The private sector will react because the private sector is a very dynamic community. Thank you.
Nope, thank you, Perry. And we'll come back to some of those points in a few minutes. And Henry, I hope you forgive me, because rather than asking you, I'd like to go to Madam Mayor, because we have scheduling conflict that's come up, unfortunately, at last notice. So thank you for joining us, Madam Mayor. You may not remember, but you and I met in London. And for those, I think this is the meeting where Prince Charles got COVID and we all got notices afterwards, and we all blame Henry for that. Nevertheless, for those of you who don't know, I saw you speak there. I think you're one of the most passionate advocates and leaders that we have in this sector. And in my view, you're the kind of leadership that we need to really drive some of the change that we talk about here. And so my question for you is, what made water and sanitation issues a priority for you? What got you engaged in this sector? What are the challenges you faced? And how did you make, what made you make water a priority in Sierra Leone?
Thank you so much. And I should clarify that it's a priority for me in Freetown as the mayor. I'm not for Sierra Leone as a whole, but of course, water should be a priority for the whole country. What made it a priority? I guess you mentioned the two things together, water and sanitation. And I would say that the hook for me was sanitation. And what everyone sees often is the solid waste. When solid waste management isn't happening, it's in your face. It's very, 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 very obvious. And that was a particular challenge, a challenge which, together with environmental damage of our natural landscape, was sufficient to galvanize me to move from the private sector and run for office of mayor. And I soon realized that you can't talk about sanitation without talking about water. And when you talk about water, you're talking about sanitation. So water became central. And of course, it goes beyond that, because Transform Freetown, which is our 3-year plan for urban development, actually has other aspects such as health, education, revenue generation. Water touches everything. So by default, water had to be a priority.
Sorry,
can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I was muted for a second. So we're heading into 2023, and we're going to have the opportunity to approach leaders from across the world on these sets of issues. For you, it was sanitation. Do you think that message is going to work for other leaders across the world? What can we do to A, help you address the challenges that exist in Freetown, and B, better convince other leaders in the world to take on these same type of challenges?
Right. The challenges, as you all know, everyone on this call is very aware of the importance of water, but also the complexity around water management, water access. And from the perspective of Freetown, there are two things I'm going to say first off, which might sound a bit, sort of like off field in respect of water, but they are so, so important. One of them is development control, urban planning and building permits. And it is so important to water, because when you allow a situation where there is no development control, then you are hitting into two other issues. One, water protection, water catchment protection being more at risk. If people can build anywhere, people can deforest. So building control land use planning is actually really critical. And that's something that we don't have control of in Freetown, because although the Local Government Act gives that power to the city, in reality, it's not devolved. And this is a theme, and it's something which should be coming higher up in the agenda when we have conversations about water. What are the legislative challenges around controlling and protecting those water catchment areas? The other one, which is also related, because when you build before you plan, you again come up with these issues, not just with sort of the dangers of the vulnerability of the water catchment, it being exposed to sunlight and so forth, contamination. But there's another thing which happens, which is contamination linked. One of the challenges that we're experiencing increasingly, and this is a global phenomena, particularly in the global south, where climate change is hitting and hitting strong, is the phenomenon of landslides and flooding. And when that happens, water sources are lost. So I would say again, that we need to really be looking at climate action from the perspective of adaptation, where it comes back to this question of planning. So what I would like to see is those issues legislatively, policy-wise, but then alongside that, finance. It's good to talk about water, but water needs money, both to access it and to protect it.
So how did you solve this problem for Freetown? Because we run into this all the time. The water people talk to the water people. We can't get to the development and land use planning, folks. We can't do that integrated approaches. How did you solve some of that for Freetown?
It's not solved. It's not solved. The land use planning is still not devolved. There is a separate company for the water, the management of the pipes, the reservoirs, etc., for water distribution. The vast, 50% of the population plus actually work on off network water. So it's not solved. What we're doing is band-aids, whilst advocating for more holistic solutions. Other things that we're doing, particularly in this context, is working with various organizations in these band-aid solutions. One of them being the creation of a fecal sludge wastewater treatment plant. For the first time, in collaboration with GO and with funding from DFID with FCDO, we've been able to establish that. And I started off by saying the link between water and sanitation is very strong. Solid waste is what catches everyone's attention, but liquid waste, we all know, is such a driver of disease. And if we're looking at integrated urban management, we're looking at targets around health. We cannot overlook water and fecal sludge. Dealing with wastewater is a critical piece in that. And really pleased with the proof of concept and the development of our first ever, it's hard to believe, in 2021, first ever wastewater treatment plant with GO, which has been successful, not only in ensuring that we're increasing collection. The goal is from 6% to 6% currently to 60%, but also in creating a model which is sustainable, because the output from that, we're working on it still. We haven't proved that bit of the concept yet, but hopefully we'll get from that manure, and we'll get from that the ability to transform some of that waste into energy.
I know that there are a number of folks within Freetown that are still going to be difficult to reach, right? We can't get trucks in there. We can't empty the latrines. And it's going to be very, very challenging. What are your thoughts on how do we make progress in addressing some of those difficult areas? Is that just going to be rethinking land planning and finding new locations and just redeveloping new communities? Or do you think there will be solutions to be able to provide support to those individuals?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to always think about how we deal with these things by saying new communities and relocations, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. 350 to 400,000 people in our city live in informal settlements, which are really challenged for access to water. So we need to look at this from a different angle. How do we upgrade those communities? How do we seek to put in water sources? So, and we are working again with UNCDF on a project now where we're trying to bring in place or to establish 40 water kiosks, which will be linked to sustainable sources of water, and we'll have water management committees. I mean, I'm sure everybody is very aware of these sort of concepts. So you're looking at a combination. It's a combination. There's no one size fits all. It's a combination of grid improvements, which the GUMA company is working on. It's off grid, so off network, these, community-based water solutions with sustainability and with protection. Of course, it's also upgrading those communities and introducing, we must not keep going forward in the way that we have been moving over the last the last 2-3 decades, which has brought us to this place. We must bring planning, but we've got to see it as a two-pronged approach. You can't move all those people out. So how do you upgrade? How do you improve water access? But at the same time, how do you plan for the future so that we're not just recreating the same challenges over and over again?
No, that's great. Look, I know you have to go, so I'm just going to I'll be really quick, but maybe just 2 quick questions. One, what can we do to help you as scientists, researchers, policymakers? How can we help you do what you're trying to do?
I think amplify this point, the relationship between the lack of urban planning, poor development control, deforestation, and access to water. That just needs to go higher up the agenda in all water conversations. We shouldn't be looking at this as fixing the problem after it's happened. We should be talking much more about creating communities that have access to water when they're created. And I would say as well, access to finance at the municipal level. Too often institutions are working with central governments, and accessing that funding can be quite complicated, particularly where you find yourself as a city government from a different political party to the central government. Across the whole piece, whether we're talking about climate action, whether we're talking about migration, all of these places where city governments have a really critical role to play, they have got to have faster access to the resources. So more action as we go, into this decade that we're all saying has got to be the decade of change for SDGs, for climate, for migration, and certainly for water. Thank you.
So one of the things that I know has worked in the past is peer-to-peer leadership. You're active with mayors from probably across the world, I hope. Can we count on you to be active in terms of elevating water and sanitation issues with these mayors? I mean, are you going to be a voice for change within that community? And will we see you in the UN in 2023 advocating for some of these reforms across the world?
I think the reforms are all interconnected. My advocacy for climate, which is linked with sanitation, is clearly also linked with water. I think we have the SDGs for that reason. A recognition is the interconnectedness of these things. So let's not be siloed. Let's speak with a voice that takes us forward on all of these points. You're not going to save the water if you don't save the trees. You're not going to, improve health if we don't have the water. Let's talk about it all. And I am a voice to speak about this in the context of my city. Thank you, and I have to go.
No, Madam Mayor, thank you so much for the time and for your dedication and commitment to this issue. We're looking forward to seeing much, much more of you in the coming years. Take care. Okay. Well, that's a hard act to follow up. And so we're going to go back to the panel for a couple of reactions as we begin to think about wrapping up for the conference and the things that we talked about here. So I invite the panelists to come back, put their cameras back on. Henry, let's turn back to you and then we'll go back to a conversation with the others. But in the last year, you've looked at leadership, what leadership looks like across the sector and what leadership really matters. You've now seen 2 different kinds of leadership in the last hour. Somebody who works through the multilateral system trying to get governments to adopt and advance strategies for addressing water, and a mayor who's been incredibly passionate advocate for driving reform in their country. What do you see in terms of as the role of some of these local and international leaders in advancing our agenda? How do we build them? How do we get there? How is this going to work over the next couple of years in trying to change what we're doing on water?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Let me just take that at a couple of levels. At the international, global level, I'm minded that we're now in our 3rd international decade of water. We've had a G7 summit on water, AU summit and SARC summit, international years of sanitation, And very few of these international declarations and commitments seem to translate into effective leadership actions. So I think when we are looking at 2023, it would be good for us to focus on actions, on measurable actions that leaders can commit to. But also, I think many leaders often face a blank page. They'll sign up to some international declaration and they'll get back to their office on the Monday morning and not be really focused or aware of what they need to start doing in order to implement those commitments. So I think we as a sector should be there to be offering them some guidance. Remember, for every leader, there's going to be an official facing a blank page that has to brief and advise the leader. We ought to be trying to fill in that blank page, or at least helping to spark some ideas. When we looked at leadership, we identified for countries that had achieved universal access in a very small time frame, or even some cities that had done it, we identified 4 actions. And let me just very quickly run through them, Aaron. I'll try and keep it to a sentence to each. But one of those was having a compelling vision. Now that's kind of, you'd expect that, but it was a compelling vision of values-laden exhortation, which drew on resonant themes around historical, aspirational, nation-building agendas. So it was something that everyone could buy into and understand about why it was important for the country, the common good. Second one was whole of government approaches. So leaders were personally engaged in well-resourcing, well-coordinated efforts throughout the implementation chain. That I think, much like you heard from Mayor Akisoya, it was quite clear from what she was saying that she was really on top of what was going on and some of the delivery systems and reforms that were needed. And it's that sort of trait that we see in effective leaders. Just 2 more, if I can. And one of these speaks to one of these recurring themes throughout the week. And that is effective leadership was having a laser-like focus on local capacity issues, constantly trying to progress chase and ensure that these local capacity deficits were turned around in sometimes quite innovative ways, bringing in health professionals, teachers to monitor helminth infections, maternal support workers, doing some of the education stuff on hygiene and so on. But all of these leaders, as opposed to big man leadership, this was leaders, these effective leaders devolved decision-making, devolved resources, and gave some relative autonomy to the local level, to local level implementers, so that they could meet and address local level implementation challenges. So that autonomy, that financial and policy autonomy at local level. And finally, number 4, to me, this is the most striking one. And I think this is something that I kind of think all of us can take away. And that is the effective leaders developed a bureaucratic culture that systemically diagnoses bottlenecks. It develops course-correcting alternatives. And within that sort of devolved leadership, dispersed leadership, they allow for feedback loops on what's going wrong, on those bottlenecks, to come back to them so that they could address some of the systemic structural weaknesses that only they were able to do. So those are the kind of 4 effective leadership traits. But I think I'll just end by this thought that actually external support agencies in many instances, for a variety of reasons, are not really supporting the development and emergence of effective leadership. That too often projectized approaches undermine the pressure for governance reforms. Too often they displace the onus on many leaders to take control. They undermine country ownership. And it's about time, I think, external support agencies really started to focus on the activities of leadership not the commitments necessarily on paper and international declarations, but the action areas that I've just described. And maybe we should be talking more with Ambassador Chava on this upcoming conference in the UN in 2023 to think through how any declarations make it clear the sort of action areas we expect from leaders, so that they're not just signing a piece of paper, but actually they know what they're going to do when they return to the office on Monday morning. Thanks, Aaron.
No, Henry, some great points. And, I'm not sure that everybody in our audience, understands how governments really work and how some of these decision makers walk into these events and their need for these very concise briefs that enable them to understand the challenges and issues that they're trying to address and be able to participate effectively and the role that they can play. But the 4 things that you've laid out, I think, are really interesting in terms of the needs of government leaders. And Henry mentioned one of these ideas that I'm struggling with, because Ambassador Kuroshi mentioned this. It came up as well in Madam Mayor's comments on what she's been trying to do in Freetown. But this idea of whole of government, this idea of intersectoral challenges, we're not built for it. If we have the meeting up in the UN in 2023 with with water ministers, we're missing our health ministers, we're missing our ministers of land planning, and we're missing all the other critical elements that clearly, based on what we heard from our 2 speakers, are necessary to solving these problems. How do we bring them into these conversations meaningfully? And I know you guys have struggled mightily with this. I mean, a lot of the things that we talk about improving environmental health conditions has to be vested within the health community. How do we bring them into this process thoughtfully?
Thanks, Aaron. I think, it's a good question. And I think it gets down to institutional accountabilities at country level. And I think for sanitation in particular, we've seen an incredible amount of fragmentation between health and urban planning and housing, and that becomes intractable. But this is one of the sort of stumbling blocks for a lot of countries, is not having a lead agency for sanitation, because we're not the only sector that has this intersectoriality. But what we do have that plagues us is a lack of accountability in countries. And so when you have a country that has a lead agency for sanitation, then they're able to play that role of quarterbacking between the ministries. So I think that is a problem. And where you don't have that accountability framework set up, then it is important that we bring all the ministries together in all of these conferences, but it's not really realistic. I mean, I think the work of the UN and other agencies at country level is to support this process of making sanitation such a priority that countries need to sort it out. And I think, when you have countries with, 5-10% coverage of safely managed sanitation, it's very clear that the issue is one of leadership within the country and not, being able to tackle that. But maybe just while I'm on it, I think, the issue is not just about national level leadership. And, we've been talking about national level, it's also subnational level. And I think the mayor's comments were really fantastic in kind of showing that the real unit of mobilization of action is at the local level. And I think sometimes we focus very much on national level political leadership, but that often doesn't trickle down into local level action. And I think, Henry alluded to this, and I think having more people like the mayor who are, action oriented, to show the way, to show that it's possible, with the means available, is so important in our sector. And I think something we're also looking at, not only how we stimulate action for those of us with boots on the ground. It's not only how do we work with the national level ministries, but how do we then show examples of local level action in countries? So, it is multi-pronged challenge, if you will, for Senate.
Well, and I think Henry has challenged us to add, as we begin our programming, as we look at projects and programs, are we thinking about reinforcing the political context and the bureaucratic institutional mechanisms that are being put in place either at the local or national level to address these types of challenges? Or is our programming perhaps unintentionally undermining some of those processes as well? And there's opportunities for leadership that we want to add to. And Henry, did you want to add to that? Because I was going to, let me ask Perry a quick question then. Perry, you heard this discussion around finance came up, capacity building, capacity all the time. I mean, look, you ran an agency with over 1,000 staff throughout the country. You had to worry about finances every single day. I mean, what were the things that, and you mentioned the leadership by the government to get it, the president to get their financial situation under control to be able to provide fundamental support to what you were doing. What does that look like for you? What are the things that national governments can do to support the mobilization of financial resources for public goods like water and sanitation?
Aaron, a good question. My personal experience, I think the key ingredients was the president, the leadership, the national leader formulated a compelling narrative for an improvement in infrastructure. That's power, that's telco, and obviously water. So that's very important. Okay. Number two would be building a trusting stakeholder base, because you will be tagging them along a journey that will be quite difficult, to be honest. And I've seen that happen, especially in the water sector. Obviously, the national leadership must have an executive capacity for existential flexibility, because change will be really difficult. And his role is to bring the whole country towards a certain end state that is much better than the current state. Okay, so clear objectives. He has a competent team, and he obviously delivered results. Fast forward, I just reviewed, Aaron, the Philippine latest, because it was only issued a couple of weeks ago by the planning agency on the Philippine Water Supply and Sanitation Master Plan. The requirement is that we need to invest $2 billion every year between now and 2030 to reach the minimum target of 2030. What is happening right now, I also review the budget appropriations, which are approved by Congress every year. So far, it's only $200 million. So you can see the gap, okay? In Metro Manila, it is not a problem because the government has already established a concession framework where the government just regulates us as long as that regulation remains to be dynamic, progressive, okay, and it delivers the right level of service to the public, and we are able to ensure that our projects are bankable. To be honest, we don't have problem securing financing because lenders are very smart. If they see that there is a working model, in this case, it's a concession agreement, they will infuse during the past 25 years, funding $5 billion of our dollars of the concessionaire's capex. But outside Metro Manila, that's where there is a challenge because lack of scale, density, all the obstacles that you natural and man-made, obviously that is very challenging. I think government will have to play a key role in really addressing the barriers for private sector to enter that space. It could be some form of viability gap funding, could probably, because it has never been adopted in the current plan, it will be adopted. I certainly hope it will entice private sector like us to invest in other, let's say, less attractive markets, but still very important market. But I think the last, no one should be left behind as we try to achieve the SDG 6 goals by 2030. I'm very worried, to be honest, about the rural sector and areas that experience conflict for decades in southern Philippines. Those guys are being left behind. And I think it's very important for government to play a lead role so that government and private sector can really support them. But they will have to allocate more resources for these markets. The other urban areas, private sector, and there are also competent publicly run water districts, to be honest. Thank you.
No, thank you, Perry. It's really helpful, and it certainly reinforces, well, actually demonstrates, right, the four elements that Henry was talking about when it comes to leadership in the sector and how you instigate change at scale. So that's wonderful to see. We're coming up on our time here. I think, you know, Ambassador Kuroshi gave us a great charge to all of us, which is, can we generate the evidence? Can we generate the solutions that can not just show us what we're up against, but to show us the opportunities for what our future might look like and how water and sanitation can play a critical role in achieving the goals and the visions that all countries, governments, and leaders might have. I'm going to turn it back to each of you for just one or two other comments about what's your leaving message for this conference about the issues that we need to take forward for 2023 and champion. And if it's okay with you, what I'll do is start with you, Henry, then go to Perry, and then finish up with Anne. So Henry, what's your final message for us?
I suppose when it comes to talking to leaders, I would say that I think there's a consensus now in the sector that we need to be strengthening systems. We need to be moving away from projectized approaches or just less of projectized approaches. And I guess my message would be that in the international development arena, international development cooperation, we should be articulating that as a way to exit from aid dependency. We are wanting to see investments in systems whereby governments, service providers are strengthening the capabilities to provide an ongoing, affordable, sustainable service for everyone, forever. That should be the project of international development cooperation, about helping countries to find their own approaches, to devise their own systems that are going to meet SDG 6. Thanks, Aaron. It's been a great conference, and thank you to all the organizers who've delivered it in testing times.
No, thank you, Henry. I think that's obviously a great message for all of us, especially those in the donor community, about how we have to bring our aid and assistance and make it most meaningfully contribute. Perry, over to you.
Aaron, you know, I've reviewed the comments in the chat, and that's why I had to point out there are areas that are being left behind, and obviously the rural areas and other second, third tier cities are obviously facing their own set of challenges. I've always been trying to understand and grapple with the fact that there's been a lot of literature that says investing in WASH, for every $1 it generates return of $30 or more, okay? But when I compare the funds flow in the sector against the attractiveness of investing in WASH, there's still a significant gap there. I think it all boils down to fundamentals of attracting investment, because it's such a very important part to address the service delivery, because even if it's a basic service, it will still cost a lot, to be honest, and that has been accounted by economists from the UN. So it's very important for all the players will have to make sure, and government will have to play a key role in addressing that last mile challenge, okay? It has to provide the enabling framework, sort of a security for other players, even civil society, to make a difference and help the government. If it doesn't really address the fundamentals, okay, then even civil society will not really enter that market. So that's the key role of government. To be honest, the reason why private sector is being required to play a key role in service delivery, because there's been decades of underinvestment of government. To be honest, government failed in delivering that service. That's public service, okay? Failing that, therefore, they're finding a way to invite other non-state actors like the private sector to help address it. To be honest, I think all the major players, actors will have to band together, collaborate to be able to make a difference in the coming years, and hopefully for the Philippines attain the 2030 targets. The gap is so huge. The private sector can make a difference, but certainly there are other non-state players that could also have a role and also will make a difference. Thank you.
No, thank you, Perry. That's a good message to end on. And you know, you've been in part of this conference in many different ways throughout the week, and I really appreciate that. I also know that you're going to be playing, along with others at Unicef, an important role in preparing for 2023, and I don't envy you in that task. But what can we do to help you? And what do you think, in hearing this week, are key messages that we need to take forward in terms of the discussions that are going to be happening over the next 2 years?
Thanks, Aaron. And yeah, just to echo others, I think congratulations on a fantastic week. It's been really enlightening and so useful to have so many people coming together. In terms of key lessons, I think one would be, you know, I think we've all sort of grasped the importance of leadership this week and having governments driving this agenda. And we've seen that time and again from the countries that are making the biggest gains. They're all where they have strong political leadership. I think a second is really, you know, how do we come together as a sector, public, private, academic, to support governments and keep them in the driving seat. And then thirdly, you know, as a message maybe also to the university community is also that we need a broad set of skills going forward, that, you know, we need to go beyond just water specialization to sanitation specialists, to health specialists, people that are comfortable with planning and financing discussions, because these are the real skill sets that we need now at country level to support governments in really working through the final challenges of the SDGs and really putting policy to action to achieve the SDGs for sanitation. So I think I'll end on that note and back to you.
Well, what I'll say is that we're here for you. You know, this is obviously a committed community. We care a great deal about these issues. It's one of the things I love about this community. And so I'm hoping that we can step up and play a role in supporting you and others' efforts as they go forward in 2023. And that includes Ambassador Kuroshi and what he tries to do up at the UN, as well as the mayor of Freetown. Whatever we can do, we hope this meeting can help support all of that. So thank you, all of you, for the time and attention for today's plenary. Please stay with me for Ambassador Kuroshi, I didn't realize you were still on. Would you like to add any final thoughts before we wrap up the session to any of the things that you heard?
Thank you much. I did not want to steal the show because all the major and excellent messages and the sound bites were sounded out already. My final message would be the transformation has been decided upon by the leaders 6 years ago. The only thing that counts now is action, impact, and accountability. And the truth, the day of the truth will be March 2023.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your time today. And I think that's a great message for us to leave on: action, impact, and accountability. And again, for all of you who are listening in, there will be opportunities regionally, opportunities nationally, opportunities up in New York in a multilateral forum for us to bring these issues forward. And I do encourage all of you to try to play a role in that at whatever level makes the most sense for you. So please do become part of the effort. Thank you, Ambassador. Now it is my great pleasure to bring the 2021 conference to a close. Please do not drop off just yet because we have a number of announcements. Let's see, is it James, are you running the slides for the closing? Just check. Great. So again, I want to thank all the individuals and groups who've helped make this conference a success. It really does take a village, and I know you don't get to see all of them and everybody who's been part of this conference, but there are many I want to thank. Just to let all of you know, this year's conference was bigger than last. We had 3,700 registrants. We had 1,500 organizations, 126 countries. We're still trying to parse out all of the different people from all the different places, but thank you so much. All of your contributions are what really made this year's conference special, and we really appreciate that. Next slide. A huge thanks to the team that helped make this technical platform and this conference work at Island Innovations. James, Christian, Sarah, Thiez, Isabel, they were behind the scenes all the time doing troubleshooting, making sure that you were able to get on the air when you were supposed to get on the air, and it just really made everything work smoothly. And they did it in a calm, collected fashion, and we were so pleased to have them as partners in this process. So thank you all to the technology team. Next. Thank you as well to some of the folks that helped support us at this end in managing the conference, Elizabeth Peeler and Mary Margaret Armstrong from Development Planning, DP Planning, excuse me. Sorry, I'm laughing because I cannot thank this group enough. The students, staff, faculty at UNC and Gillings within the Department of Environmental Science and Engineering. These folks are working behind the scenes all the time to help support you as moderators, as panelists, day-to-day support, and of course, helping us plan through and think through the key thematic areas that are going to be featured in the conference. I can't thank them all enough. Next. Special thank you, Clarissa Brocklehurst, Joe Brown, who sat with us weekly to go through the developments and think through the plenaries and the events and help us reach out to key speakers. Those of you who saw yesterday's plenary in particular really benefited from the contributions that those two have made to our week. And I think we all are very grateful to their contributions. Next. And then to our staff. And James, you were supposed to add Kata Liang's name to the top of this slide. I cannot do this without the core team here at the Water Institute. And I've said it before, I'll say it again and repeatedly, Kata Liang is the heart and soul of this conference and has done a fantastic job ensuring that the best content from our community comes forward in this event. Manal Khan, Cody San, who just did an incredible job for us over the last month to be able to pull this off. And Alicia Marshall, thank you very much to this core team at the Water Institute. Next. A special thanks to all those who were involved in our awards that we gave away this week. And to remind folks who weren't able to be part of all of these, the Best Original Research Abstract, Dr. Sally Kaywood, the runner-up, Rachel Sklar, Zayu Shu, Wellers, Chava, do I have to read all these names? Ashley Musprat, thank you, congratulations. The Best Published Paper by Miriam Zakwat and Sally as well. And the runner-up, Rachel Pelez, Andy Fang, Clara McLeod, Diane Vernon, Tim Wang, Joanne Cones, Carolyn Dickler, and Salim Haji Ranji. Congratulations again to all the Sanitation Worker Awards. We were really pleased that we were able to be part of this. And very pleased to our sponsors who were able to make that happen. Waterlines and S&V and some of the others, very grateful. We couldn't have done that without you. Special thanks as well for those of you who are involved in the Waterlines presentation to Urine, NSYNC, and the Memorial Prize. Congratulations to Boniface Okach and to the tribute that we heard about Urine. It was wonderful to hear those touching stories, and thank you all who were part of that process. Next. Oh, right, especially thank you, Naja and Flora and Insig for sharing your memories of Urine with us. That was, again, very touching, and we were really pleased that we were able to host that. To our trivia winner, Nagang Christian, congratulations. It was great fun to watch him compete and to see his entire family there. So I think he's benefiting from, I'm looking at Kata, does he get a free ride to next year's conference? He gets a free ride to next year's conference. So to encourage each of you to participate in the trivia competition next year. So congratulations to Nagang, and we look forward to seeing him in Chapel Hill next year. Next. All of our abstract reviewers, and there were many of you. This is not a, it was very difficult, right? We can't offer free registration, unfortunately, to our abstract reviewers and reward them when they get to Chapel Hill. But they dedicated many, many, many hours to reviewing the hundreds of fantastic abstracts that we got for this conference, helped triage those to ensure that you've got the best of the brightest that came forward. So thank you to all of our abstract reviewers. We really, really appreciated it. Next. And our shout out recipients, not just our recipients, but those who provided the videos. Each day we opened up with some of the, I thought it was a great addition to the conference, and it was wonderful to see and put a focus on, the people who really are making a difference on the ground. This last session, we talked about leadership, we talked about champions, and it was great to see a lot of those leaders and champions highlighted each morning. Thank you so much for those who provided the videos, and congratulations to those who got the shout outs. I'm hoping that we'll be able to tap into you in the future for as leaders in both this conference, but also in what you're doing on the ground. Next, all the interpreters. Thank you to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation who provided interpretation for these events, and Interactio who provided the interpretation services. Next. Thank you very much to all our plenary speakers. I will not name them, you saw them. All these are recorded, and I encourage you, if you weren't able to catch them live, to go back and listen to them or watch them. Just wonderful conversations. And again, we couldn't do it without their contributions. They really make all of this work. You bore witness to that today. Just a great group of folks who are really pleased. And thank you again to all the plenary speakers. Next. Thank you as well to all of those who have been reporting out on our conference and highlighting these conversations on social media. Really generated some thoughtful conversations, not just in our chat spaces here, but outside. And so really thank you to all who engaged about the conference on social media. It was great to see. We really appreciate it. And we encourage you to continue to do that. Over the next couple of weeks, we hope to roll out some of this material, both in YouTube and as podcasts and webcasts, and we hope we can continue these conversations going. So thank you so much to all of you who are engaged in social media on these types of things. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Next. Our moderators, you saw them throughout the week, Clarissa Brocklehurst, Oliver Cumming, Christy Pullen-Sednick. They made these plenaries work, and they invested time and effort working with all the other speakers to ensure that that could happen. It really requires special effort to be able to pull that off. Just thank you to all of, a special thank you to all of our moderators. So thank you. Our late and early show hosts and guests. This is to be frank, the late early shows are a labor of love. And I think that Sneha, Priya, Regina, all stepped up to make these late early shows a meaningful experience for our regional guests. And again, for those of you who didn't see them, check them out on Passable. Some of the best conversations of the conference happened through these regional dialogues. And so if you didn't get that chance, I really encourage you to go ahead and tune into those sessions. They made great listening and were actually great fun. And it really captured the spirit of the conference in new ways. And we have really appreciated their leadership in making that happen. Next. Our posters and verbal presenters. Again, you guys were the highest rated abstracts that we got. And this was a double-blinded process. It really was competitive, very competitive this year. We had limited space. And so you should feel very proud for being selected to be part of the conference. And we were extremely proud and pleased and humbled to have you be part of the conference. I think one of the things we heard repeatedly throughout the week is just the quality of the technical content. And that came from all of you and all of the presenters. So thank you so much. And we hope you all will be contributing again next year. Next. Thank you to a couple of special folks behind the scenes that you've benefited from their work, but you don't know. Angie Bremer, Adriel Designs, who have helped us do all of the web-based material that you guys are looking at in the website. Again, they've created a presence for the Water Institute. If you haven't seen the new Water Institute website, please do check it out. It's great, and we owe Adriel and Angie credit for all of that. Next. The conference doesn't stop today. It does for some of us, but not for all of this course going on. Please keep the discussions going in social media, wherever you work, wherever you're talking about it. Do keep these conversations going. Again, we're going to keep rolling out material, and I hope you guys can play a role in disseminating that to new and bigger audiences, across the planet. Finally, a last thank you again to all of our sponsors. You guys know this. I'll say it again. We could not do this without you. In the chat, even during this plenary discussion, I caught a quick glimpse of one note that was a thank you from one of our participants, and I don't remember, I couldn't see from which country, but said that could never attend this conference because of the registration fees. And we're just so pleased that for the first time they were able to join because it was free and that they were able to partake in the conversation. That's only possible because of all the different organizations that you see on this page right here. They make sure that anyone, anywhere can connect and be part of our conference and to do it for free. And so thank you especially to our headline sponsors, World Vision, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, German Cooperation, Chematics. I also want to thank all of our other high-level sponsors. You can see them here. Osprey, of course, has been a long-standing donor. We very, very much appreciate their contributions. P&G, Biorad, DT Global, Clean Water here, RTI, Easy Water for Everyone, the Reckitt Global Hygiene Institute, who joined us for the first time, IATMO, DevWorks, SATO, USAID, NSF, Tetra Tech, IWA, Lipopo Resilience Lab. Thank you all so much. And thank you to all the private sponsors who came forward and voluntarily contributed. When we made this registration free, several people stepped up, and individuals said, no, I want to contribute and I want to be part of that. And that too helps enable us be able to offer these services. So with all of that, I bring the 2021 Water and Health Conference to a close. We are all hoping, and you can move to the last slide to see you here. What happened to the last slide? I thought I was going to show the buffet line at the Friday Center. We are all looking forward to seeing you all in Chapel Hill next year. Thank you again for all your contributions to the conference, and we'll see you soon online. And thank you. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. And there's the buffet line. What we all look forward to, food at the Friday Center. So we're looking forward to seeing you all next year at the Friday Center. Take care and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.